Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. The phone ringing closer to midday on a regular workday once again split the woman's life into the happy period before and the almost hopeless one after. The familiar word, mother, lit up on the screen. Although calls in the middle of the day weren't a frequent occurrence, she didn't feel any bad premonitions about it. Maybe Eleanor missed her, or wanted advice on choosing clothes. Sarah put a period with her pencil on the margin of the paper containing a draft document for a client, and hurried to answer the call so as not to worry her loved one with a long wait. As soon as she heard her mother's voice, sounding unusually muffled, her heart sank somewhere down. It was obvious that something not at all joyful had happened, and her assumption, unfortunately, was confirmed. "My dear, hello. Please don't worry too much. It just so happened that I'm in a medical facility right now." Sarah became alarmed. "Mom? What happened? What facility are you in? What are the doctors saying? What do you need me to bring? What's the room number?" The voice from the receiver interrupted the stream of questions. "My dear, I beg you, don't worry. It all happened like in a movie. I slipped, I fell, I almost lost consciousness, but everything's fine." Martha, the neighbor, was passing by. She kept me cheerful and supported me while we waited for the ambulance. Dr. Adams said everything will be fine, but I'll have to stay in the medical facility for a little while. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? I would have rushed over, helped. I didn't want to bother you in the middle of your workday. But visiting hours are in the evening, from 4 to 7, and if you go home from the office first, then to the pharmacy, I was afraid you might not make it. Anyway, please write down what you need to bring here. The main thing is a document confirming your right to medical care, and a phone charger. Water too, not sparkling, because for some reason I'm incredibly thirsty." Invisible to her, Eleanor sighed, and Sarah pictured, as if in reality, how her loved one's face must have been contorted by the pain shock. She hurried to end the conversation, clarifying the facility number and room number. Sarah reread the list of everything her mother had dictated, added chicken broth and wet wipes to it, and with shaky legs went to ask Mr. Davies for time off. "Mr. Davies, please, may I leave early today? I need to due to personal circumstances. My mother is in a medical facility." Mr. Davies, a friend of Sarah's husband from their student years, expressed polite sympathy, and upon learning which facility her subordinate's mother was in, he encouraged her and asked, "The doctors in this facility are good. Maybe the setting isn't too luxurious, but both the equipment and the staff are top-notch. I stayed here a few times and checked out feeling brand new. So everything will be fine. Don't get down. By the way, are you driving today, or is James using the car? Maybe the driver can give you a ride?" Sarah was touched by Mr. Davies's concern and decided she wasn't in a position to refuse the offer. "Thank you, that would be very helpful. I won't keep the driver long. I just need to stop by my mother's house and that's it. I won't keep the driver any longer. I'll gather the necessary things there, and then I'll call a taxi. Thank you." Mr. Davies wished Sarah success and promised, "Come out to the central entrance in 15 minutes. I'll tell the driver to wait for you at your mother's house and drop you off at your family home. He has to come back for me anyway, and your house is on the way." Thanking the considerate Mr. Davies again, Sarah went to turn off her computer and tidy up her workspace. She took the document with her so as not to let the whole team down and to finish the necessary work by the next morning. Sarah could barely make out the meaning of the anecdotes the driver tried to entertain her with, but she was even grateful that his stream of talk forced her to react in some way and prevented her from sinking into anxious thoughts. Following the list, ticking off each item, she gathered things in her mother's apartment, watered her favorite flowers, and turned off the gas and water just in case. She checked the refrigerator for anything perishable, collected the trash to take out, and only then went downstairs and continued on with her talkative companion. Not far from their house was a supermarket with a pharmacy section inside, and Sarah decided to stop there on the way. Asking the driver to stop near the garbage containers, she threw out the collected trash and rushed in for groceries. Moving almost on autopilot, she bought everything she needed and was soon simultaneously preparing dinner for James and broth for Eleanor. While the food was boiling and baking, Sarah called James and explained the situation. "Dear, Mom is in a medical facility. I'm going to her. I don't know exactly how long I'll stay there yet. Dinner will be on the stove." James admitted, "I know. Mr. Davies told me you needed support. Wait for me. I'll try to come home earlier, and we'll go to the facility together. You never know what else might be needed, and this way I'll be on standby." James didn't let Sarah down, and picking her up along with the 2 bags she had packed, drove her to the medical facility. Sarah managed to persuade the staff member receiving deliveries to let her through to her mother and the attending physician, who, fortunately, was there. James stayed to wait for Sarah in the lobby, but verbally conveyed kind words and wishes for a speedy recovery. The elderly woman tried to smile when she saw her daughter enter the room, but it was noticeable that she was both uncomfortable and scared. Sarah greeted everyone in the room quietly but clearly and went to her mother's bed. A weight was suspended from the unfortunate woman's right leg. Her lips, bitten almost to bleeding, clearly indicated that the victim of the ice had been in great pain. Sarah listened to her mother's story about how she got into the scrape, and trying not to cry, began to unpack everything she had brought into the bedside table. The phone was immediately put on charge. She gave her mother the cooked broth to drink and made her eat a few spoonfuls of raw, finely grated carrots. The internet says that a salad like this in the first days after an injury is the best vitamin remedy. Then I'll give you some sour berry juice. That's healthy too. "Oh, my daughter, don't worry. You should probably go. James will come home. He'll probably be surprised you're not there." Sarah explained that James knew what had happened, had rushed home so she wouldn't have to take a taxi, that he hadn't been allowed in, but he sent his regards. As if she had just been waiting for this remark, the woman lying on the next bed became animated. "The staff here are rude and boorish," she chimed in. "You can't get hold of them day or night. They just drink tea and hang around the doctors. Giving them chocolates, even money, is useless. They still do their duties half-heartedly." Sarah remained silent, and after finding out her mother's doctor's name and patronymic, went to look for him. The restless Martha couldn't resist remarking here too. "If he's not in the doctor's room, check the dressing room. He's probably flirting with someone there." Thanking the grumbler dryly, Sarah went out into the corridor. The nurses on the ward, accustomed to all sorts of patients' relatives' tears and hysterics, looked at the visitor asking how to find the doctor with a mixture of annoyance and weariness. But one of them, who seemed like the head nurse, answered thoroughly, "The doctor is currently in the head of department's office, down that end of the corridor, the second to last door. You can wait there or sit on the bench near the doctor's room." She waited for Dr. Adams, and he, upon learning that she was the elderly woman's daughter, invited her into the office. Showing an X-ray on the computer screen, Dr. Adams explained, "If I can put it this way, your mother's fracture turned out to be a good one. Generally, there are 2 treatment options." The doctor began to explain the nuances of each method, then asked, "Which option have you decided on?" Sarah looked Dr. Adams in the eye but didn't answer, instead asking a counter-question. "Tell me, doctor, for example, if the patient with a fracture like my mother's was someone personally close to you, what would you recommend?" Smiling, Dr. Adams replied briefly, "Surgical intervention. In a very similar case with my relative, our head of department performed a similar operation. She's been leading an active life again for a year now. She even works in the garden. so I can't keep up with her. Sarah clarified all the details of the upcoming operation, wrote down what else needed to be brought for the post-operative period, and saying goodbye to Dr. Adams, left the office. She had to announce to her mother that the operation was scheduled for the very next day. Composing herself, Sarah presented it as lightly as possible, trying not to alarm her loved one. "I'll come by tomorrow. I'll meet you after the operation. Everything will be fine. Don't worry." "My dear, what about your work? Mr. Davies will probably be angry?" "Oh, don't worry about that. I'll get all the work done and won't let you or Mr. Davies down." With the operation, the long journey for the elderly woman to walk again had only just begun. For 2 weeks, Sarah visited her mother almost every day to feed her and take care of her. The elderly woman tried to object and repeatedly stated, "My daughter, take care of yourself. Don't come here so often. The food here isn't bad, and I don't have much appetite anyway. Where would it come from if I'm not using any energy?" However, the elderly woman couldn't persuade Sarah. When the day of discharge arrived, Sarah went to Dr. Adams for recommendations. Dr. Adams was cautious and warned, "Your mother is a very energetic lady, but I've expressed my point of view, and I'll repeat it to you. I wouldn't be overly optimistic if I were you. But you don't need to despair either, although you absolutely cannot put full weight on the injured limb. Mobility aids are the best friends for an elderly woman for at least the next month. And you need to be careful after that too. Moving is necessary, of course, but carefully. Preventive treatment is indicated to avoid problems. I'll be waiting for a follow-up X-ray in 6 weeks to check the stage of bone fusion. That seems to be everything." Sarah clarified, "Maybe some vitamins for Mom to take?" Dr. Adams shrugged. "In principle, yes. But generally, the rehabilitation plan should be explained to you at the facility where you live." Sarah called a special taxi service specializing in transporting people with limited mobility, and after heroically navigating the access streets, the elderly woman finally found herself in her apartment. A new problem arose for Sarah. Her mother's physical condition still left much to be desired, and even a simple trip to the bathroom or kitchen could result in a new injury. At first, Sarah came to her mother twice a day, and closer to the holidays, she was practically exhausted. Traffic jams took up so much time that only a few miserable hours were left for sleep. She turned to James. "Dear, let's have Mom stay with us for a while. At least I won't have to rush between apartments." James's face darkened, and after a heavy pause he replied, "Dear, I think the world of your mother. She's a wonderful woman, but I'm sorry. I'll be frank. We simply don't have room for her here. As you know, we have a studio apartment. The room is large in terms of square footage, but it's only one. When I tried to persuade you to buy a place, I didn't find understanding. Both you and your mother were against it. Dear, couldn't we put up some kind of screen? It would be like having 2 rooms. Listen, it would be uncomfortable for an elderly woman first and foremost. I play computer games loudly. I listen to music until late. Besides, ask her yourself if she'd agree to move. I can say with 100% certainty that she'll say no. Your mother is very tactful and wise, and understands that the further away she lives, the better her relationship with her son-in-law will be." James was right. The elderly woman, as soon as she heard the idea of moving into her son-in-law's and daughter's apartment, just snorted indignantly. "There can't even be a conversation about it. Home walls help. I won't go to you, especially since it would be uncomfortable to be sick there." Sarah obeyed her mother's will, and besides, she didn't want to argue with James at all. She continued to waste time sitting in traffic jams and had to leave her position at Mr. Davies's firm. With Mr. Davies's permission, Sarah transferred to a half-day position and was very glad that Mr. Davies had been able to accommodate her. She prepared documents during her visits, trained her successor, and diligently performed all duties that didn't require constant presence in the office. However, rehabilitation cost much more money than Sarah could have imagined. Sometimes she shared her indignation with James about how pharmacies changed prices at will and tried to sell the most expensive version of medication. And then James would grumble, "Listen, dear, but surely your mother should be provided with some free medications, shouldn't she?" Sarah tried not to answer this. In the end, the family budget didn't suffer, and she hadn't asked James for money in the almost 6 months that had passed since the fateful news about her mother's troubles. She generally tried to handle this situation herself, without involving James. The weather changed, but Sarah's schedule, by now a tradition, remained almost unchanged. In the morning, she prepared breakfast for James, and if she had time, prepped lunch and dinner. Then, packing part of the breakfast into a container, she rushed to her mother's, stopping at the store and pharmacies along the way. Care, maintaining morale, and helping with movement around the apartment took a lot of time. Then she would stop by the office and rush home by evening. In case of any emergencies, her mother's neighbor, the same one who helped her wait for the ambulance, had a key to the apartment. Martha sometimes dropped by to watch television together and gossip about something. So the elderly woman couldn't be called abandoned. But Sarah desperately wanted to get her mother back on her feet quickly, and not just because she had to spend a huge amount of time on daily travel, without days off or holidays, between quite distant areas of the town. It was simply because her mother was the closest person to her. She had, in essence, given Sarah life twice, the first time on her birthday 38 years ago, but the main time was later, when a terrible tragedy struck her like a terrible avalanche. It was Eleanor who was there in those dark days, helping her move when her legs almost gave out from nervous shock, forcing her to eat and drink with persuasion, sometimes against her will. Quitting her well-paid, easy job, Eleanor sold her apartment in their hometown and virtually carried her, like a huge, unwieldy sack, 2,000 kilometers away from the place where everything reminded her of her inhuman grief. It was the elderly woman who forced Sarah to find a job where it was almost impossible to be alone with her sad thoughts, where she had to look stylish and fit. Sarah didn't consider her help to her mother a sacrifice, and despite her fatigue, tried to surround James with care as well, especially since their 10th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Sarah wanted to arrange a touching congratulation and a pleasant surprise for her patient husband. She had already drafted a preliminary menu, found a confectionery that took custom orders, and arranged for the preparation of an unusual-shaped cake for James, who adored sweets. The holiday was approaching, but shortly before it arrived, James warned her during breakfast one morning. "Sorry, dear. I need the car for a few days. I have to go to another region, to a branch office. It seems the branch manager there is messing with the reports. Profit has dropped significantly, although everything is stable in other departments, and there's even growth in some places. I'll try to be quick, of course, but planes are unlikely to fly to those parts, and I really don't fancy going by train. Can you manage without the car?" Although Sarah had been counting on their reliable family car, she didn't argue. After all, James really needed the car more. She smiled. "Of course I can manage." James politely thanked her for breakfast and promised, "It's okay. We'll buy you a car too. Things at work will normalize a bit, and you can choose a model." Running out of the house, James kissed Sarah on the cheek, winked, and said, "Don't worry. I remember our wedding anniversary. I'll try to be back by Friday evening." Taking advantage of James's absence, Sarah moved in with her mother for a while to save time on travel. In those few days, she managed to do a thorough cleaning, and the apartment felt somehow especially fresh, like spring. Only the day before the holiday did she have to return home to bring an urgently needed education document to the office. However, this was even convenient, because she also needed to tidy up at home and prepare some of James's favorite salads. In the morning, Sarah, taking the holiday treats she had set aside in separate containers, rushed back to her mother's. As usual, she gave her a massage, helped her walk around the room, and even waited for the elevator repair to finish before finally taking her mother outside. Eleanor could enjoy the good weather and the feeling that life was returning to what it was before the injury. After a short walk, the elderly woman and Sarah had lunch, and Sarah began to apologize. "Mom, please forgive me. I'm leaving earlier today. I want to arrange a surprise for James. If you get tired of watching TV, your keys, your phone is charged. If anything happens, call." "Okay, run along, my daughter. Happy holiday to you and James. Imagine, 10 years together already." Kissing her mother, Sarah hurried along her pre-planned route. Spring, which had long since taken hold and was rapidly approaching summer, offered gentle warmth, and the sweet and tart scent of blooming lilacs set a romantic mood. Contrary to the popular belief that marrying in May brings trouble, she hadn't suffered in her second marriage. On the contrary, James was a quiet harbor for Sarah. There were no stormy passions between them, but there was mutual affection and respect. Sarah valued James because he didn't pry into her soul, didn't torment her with jealousy and suspicion, didn't demand that she bear him an heir. Even when he first declared his serious intentions, she frankly and honestly warned him that children were absolutely not part of her plans. This statement didn't frighten James. A few years after the wedding, James asked if she had changed her mind about having a child, but upon hearing a categorical no, he didn't ask for the reasons and never brought up the topic again. James was a good partner, and of course, she loved him in her own way, with all the strength her wounded heart was capable of. Following the list she had made the day before, she bought drinks, got the seafood James adored, and bought various small things: crispy bread, fresh green salad, fruit. Gradually, 2 large shopping bags, which Sarah had thoughtfully brought with her, filled up. Hanging them on both shoulders, she stopped by the confectionery where she had ordered the cake. Now she could go home. Approaching the entrance, Sarah looked hopefully at their family parking spot and sighed with relief. The car wasn't there. This meant she would have time to set the table, hang balloons, and get dressed before James returned. Mentally praising herself for the convenient bags that left one hand free, Sarah, hastily opening the door, finally found herself in their family home. Placing the cake box on the bench, she suddenly froze in surprise. A foreign sound, coming from the kitchen, brazenly intruded into the familiar hum of the apartment building. Strange, there were no unfamiliar shoes on the mat. No foreign belongings were visible, but she could clearly hear the clinking of dishes, as if someone was moving a heavy plate or a large mug. They didn't keep pets. They had always wanted a cute dog, but her mother's misfortune had adjusted that plan. It would probably have been much smarter to go out onto the landing, close the door, and call James. But from exhaustion, Sarah didn't act as safety dictated. Automatically slipping off her shoes, and still with the bags on her shoulders, Sarah entered the kitchen and nearly collapsed in astonishment. A boy, seemingly about 6 years old, sat on a chair with one leg tucked under him. The unknown little guest was completely engrossed in eating. On the table in front of him was James's huge mug, a bottle of water, and a large deep plate into which she had put a layered salad the evening before so it would soak. A spoon sticking out from the edge clearly indicated that the dish had already been unceremoniously sampled. The child was biting into a stick of smoked sausage with appetite, and Sarah's heart ached as memories flooded back. It was too painful to act rationally. For a few seconds, she even thought she was hallucinating due to overwork or some other reason. However, the vision was too realistic. The sound, the image, and even the smell of the sausage. The engrossed boy only tore himself away from his tasty activity after Sarah, her voice slightly hoarse from nervous shock, attracted his attention with a question. "Hey, hello. Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The boy jumped up from the chair and, without letting go of the sausage, reported, "My name is Boy's name. Uncle James's name brought me here, told me to wait for him. He said I could eat whatever I wanted. So I'm eating. The sausage is tasty, just very salty. It didn't even occur to Sarah that the person the boy called uncle was not her husband. Such an incredible coincidence, like in a traditional New Year's movie, where the hero didn't realize he had opened someone else's apartment with his keys, and nothing about the typical setting of a standard apartment bothered him at all. Simply couldn't happen. Sarah could confidently vouch that it was difficult to find a design even remotely similar to the one in her and James's home. Of course, there must be a logical explanation for the boy's appearance in the kitchen, Sarah thought. She herself had married in the spring, and the boy's last name meant absolutely nothing to her. James was his parents' only child, but as far as she knew, he had relatives. It was just that they hadn't been invited to their modest wedding, and she didn't know them not only by face but also by name. So it was quite possible that the boy sitting in front of her was the child of one of James's cousins. But why had he brought this boy to their apartment without even warning her? Knocked off her psychological balance, Sarah couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts were jumbled, and she hadn't even managed to come up with any plausible version when James called. Coming out of her stupor, she finally took the bags off her shoulders and answered the call. James began to speak quickly, literally not letting Sarah get a word in. "Beloved, we just missed each other by a little. I just left my mother's apartment and I'll be there in literally 20 minutes and explain everything to you. In the meantime, set the table." The confused Sarah felt a little better and replied briefly, "Okay." She felt the boy's gaze very distinctly on her, but couldn't find the strength to look him in the eyes. Sarah brought her new slippers from the hallway, which she had just recently bought in anticipation of the approaching summer season, and offered, "Boy, it's hot indoors in sneakers. Here, take these slippers, put them on. It will be more comfortable and convenient." The child silently obeyed. To lighten the atmosphere and occupy the boy who had been dropped on her, but at the same time avoid having to talk to him much, she asked, "Boy, do you know how to blow up balloons?" The boy nodded. Sarah quickly went to the room, brought the child a whole package, opened it, then, obeying some impulse, rinsed the ends through which the boy was to inflate the balloons and handed them to him, asking, "Don't blow them up too much. When you get tired, rest, and I'll help you tie them. Agreed?" The child nodded busily and without any embarrassment asked, "Is your name Sarah's name?" Sarah shrugged. "My name can be changed in different ways." The boy's eyes widened in surprise. "But that's a boy's name. Are you a man or something?" Sarah chuckled. "No, I'm not a man. It's just a versatile name. Like some other names." Silence fell in the kitchen. The boy, lost in thought, busied himself with the balloons. Sarah, watching her guest from the corner of her eye, began to unpack the bags, prepare what she had planned, and gradually set the table. Sarah put the cake in the refrigerator and, pausing to tie the balloons the boy had inflated, felt not annoyance, but a poignant pain. She wasn't angry with James, but all sorts of thoughts kept swirling in her head. Sarah felt the curious gaze of the little guest on her, but didn't dare to look him in the eyes. So they observed each other, but barely spoke. Busy with her tasks, Sarah didn't even notice James enter the kitchen with a huge bouquet of flowers in his hands and a large bag. James placed his load on the floor and handed Sarah the flowers. "Dear, congratulations to you and me on our holiday. I see you've already met the boy, made friends. That's wonderful. Well then, let's celebrate." The boy, noticeably cheered up by James's arrival, said shyly, "Congratulations." And when everyone sat down at the table after the inevitable fuss, he boasted loudly, "Uncle James's name. I blew up the balloons myself, and Aunt Sarah's name helped me tie them. We prepared a good surprise for you." The adult man mumbled something indistinct in response to the little guest's chatter, praising the boy and Sarah, who hadn't even touched the food. There was tension in the apartment, and James set about fixing the situation. He quietly turned on music and began to enthusiastically praise the dishes Sarah had prepared. Then he proposed a toast to Sarah's beauty and charm, took a box from his pocket, handed it to her, and said, "Congratulations. I hope you like it." Sarah, lost in speculation and thoughts about why James had brought the child to the apartment, only now remembered her own gift. Leaving the not-so-cheerful company for a moment, she, clutching the unopened box in her hand, retrieved the hidden present. Returning to the table, she handed James the package and limited herself to a terse phrase, "Happy anniversary." James, hastily tearing open the wrapping paper, began to loudly admire the gift and started showing the received item to the boy. Sarah felt uncomfortable and again sank into her thoughts. This was not at all how she had imagined celebrating their wedding anniversary. She wanted to prepare a surprise, but James had managed not just to surprise her, but to completely throw her off balance in the most natural way. Unexpected things again. Sarah coughed violently, choking on mineral water, when she heard the question addressed to her. "Dear, the boy will stay with us for a couple of weeks, okay?" She was silent, not knowing what to say. James tried to justify himself. "I stopped by my mother's to pick you up. I wanted to explain everything to you on the way home, but I didn't have time, and this is the surprise that resulted. Sorry I didn't think to warn you, but I was sure I'd find you at your mom's and would warn you on the way that we had a guest with us." James's monologue ended in prolonged silence. Sarah moved the food on her plate with a fork, not looking up at James. He, flustered, also didn't know what else to say in his defense. With childish spontaneity, the boy broke the silence, asking loudly, "Aunt Sarah's name? Thank you. I've eaten. Can I try the cake now?" The boy showed his empty plate. With a stony face, Sarah got up from her chair and went to the refrigerator. She wanted to scream, stomp her feet, sob, and smash the dishes, stained, like her faith in James's honesty. She knew it wouldn't make things easier. The most probable explanation for James bringing the boy to the apartment seemed to her to be that James had cheated. With her whole being, Sarah now hated the man she had loved for 10 years as much as she was capable. James, who knew his wife well, guessed from her jerky movements that in a little while she would directly express everything on her mind. He decided to lead the little guest away from the table to the relaxation area, where he could be distracted from the serious conversation between the adults that was about to happen. "Boy, let's go. I'll turn on the game console for you. True, my games are mostly complex, but we can find something to your taste online, or I'll put on cartoons for you if you want." "Will I be able to eat the cake?" the boy asked with interest. "Of course, you can have everything there." The boy's eyes sparkled. He trustingly followed the master of the apartment to the cozy, soft corner. Sarah, who heard James's conversation with the guest, cut a large piece of cake, carefully placed it on a plate, turned on the electric kettle, and watched attentively as it boiled. The click of it turning off brought her out of her reverie. Brewing tea, Sarah placed a cup of the delicious drink, a sugar bowl with a spoon, and the plate with the cake on a tray, and then carried it to the table near the apartment's gaming area. James was showing the boy his collection of computer games, but the boy, who was clearly well-mannered, tore himself away from the fascinating activity and thanked her. "Thank you very much." Sarah nodded, and turning sharply, left. When James came into the kitchen, he found a strange scene. Sarah was sitting on the floor, holding dirty children's sneakers in her hands, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. James tried to joke, "Hey, dear, what's wrong? So what if the child walked into the kitchen in dirty shoes? We'll turn on the robot vacuum, let it work. It's no big deal. Is it worth getting upset over a little bit of dust? Especially since it's a holiday today." Sarah looked at James in a way that made him feel uneasy and quietly said, "Dear, I think I've told you repeatedly that I don't want to be in the same space with children for long periods. It's beyond my strength. Perhaps there were significant circumstances for your action, or as you put it, surprise, and you can be understood. Only forgive me. I have absolutely no desire to deal with explanations today. I'm going to Mom's now and will, for a bit." James couldn't understand the reason for his wife's categorical decision, but he saw perfectly well that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, so he offered, "Dear, I'm truly very sorry that I didn't warn you, but I can explain everything. I think that when you listen to me, you'll understand that I simply couldn't have acted differently. I'll wait until you're ready to talk." Sarah unexpectedly gently placed the children's sneakers on the floor, wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, and walked toward the door, as if she hadn't heard James. James took Sarah's hand and asked, "Dear, wait a minute. I'll call a taxi to your mother's house so I don't worry about you." She nodded and was soon riding in the car, fiddling with the innocent strap of her handbag. The road was clear, and the journey to her mother's house took much less time than during peak hours. As soon as Sarah opened the door, she heard, "Martha, come in, dear. I'm not feeling very well." Sarah closed the door behind her, and taking off her shoes, went into her mother's bedroom. The elderly woman became alarmed when she saw her daughter. "My daughter, why are you back? Didn't James come home?" "By my calculations, your anniversary celebration should be in full swing, and for some reason, you're here. My daughter, what happened?" Sarah approached her mother's bed, sat right on the floor, and resting her head against the elderly woman's hand, told her everything that had happened from the moment she returned home and saw the boy there. Finishing her story, Sarah voiced her assumption, "Mom, I'm almost sure that the boy is James's illegitimate son. The boy looks about 6 years old, which means my husband was cheating on me and even had the audacity to present me with proof of his infidelity right on our wedding anniversary." The elderly woman tried to calm Sarah. "I'm sure James can explain everything. I feel that he loves you. Believe my experience, he would hardly risk his relationship with you and cheat." "However," Sarah cried without stopping. The elderly woman stroked her daughter, so grown up yet defenseless and sobbing, but said no more words because they were all powerless. Finally, when the stream of tears dried up, Sarah silently got up from the floor and went to wash her face, swollen from crying. Sarah felt completely drained. Returning to her mother's room, Sarah admitted, "I'm very tired today. Do you mind if I lie down?" The elderly woman didn't object or suggest, for example, talking more or having dinner. She understood that her unhappy daughter needed to rest. "Of course, my daughter. But let's take some kind of sedative, maybe valerian drops or something. It will be good for both of us." Sarah did as her mother asked and went to sleep. The nervous tension was so strong that Sarah blacked out and woke up when the clock showed 10 in the morning. Jumping up from the sofa, she rushed to the kitchen, where she found her mother mixing batter for pancakes. "Good morning, my daughter. You're just in time. We'll have breakfast now." Working together, the women made pancakes and, as if by agreement, didn't say a word about yesterday's situation. When Sarah was washing the dishes, the elderly woman asked, "My daughter, please go to the cultural center with Martha. She has 2 tickets to a very good play, excellent seats. Her relative gave them to her for her birthday. They were supposed to go together, and as luck would have it, the relative got sick, and the other relatives can't accompany Martha. Some are called to their gardens. Some are flying on business trips. In short, the ticket is going to waste. It's a shame." Sarah shook her head. "Mom, I don't want to go anywhere. I'm not in the mood at all." However, if the elderly woman had something in mind, she knew how to insist. "That's exactly why you should go, because you're not in the mood. Art is excellent at shifting thoughts in your head and changing emotions. Please, my daughter, not for the sake of the wasted ticket, but for my sake. Although Sarah had to comply with her mother's wish, she categorically refused the suggestion to stop by a beauty salon beforehand for a new haircut. Waiting until Martha had taken Sarah away, the elderly woman called James and said in almost a commanding tone, "James, Sarah will be gone for about 3 hours. Come over, we need to talk." James didn't resist but warned, "Eleanor, I'll definitely come, but I have no one to leave the boy with. I suppose I could find a hired nanny, but I wouldn't trust the boy to just anyone. So I can only come with him. Do you mind?" Eleanor sighed. "I don't mind." "Excellent. Then I'll be there with the boy in half an hour." 30 minutes later, the elderly woman, carefully walking to the door leaning on her sturdy walker, let James and the boy into the apartment. James introduced the child, and the boy politely said hello. Eleanor tried not to show her incredible anxiety and hospitably invited the boy into the kitchen. "Come in. I have a television there, and pastries are waiting for you. Shall I make cocoa or tea?" The child announced that coffee was tastiest for him, but children shouldn't drink it often, and he would have tea because he was too grown up for cocoa. Eleanor almost laughed from surprise, but controlled her emotions in time, and addressing James asked, "Can I offer the boy a chicory drink then? It's almost like coffee." The boy was delighted. "I want to try this chicory, Uncle James's name, can I?" James agreed, and when Eleanor skillfully managed to prepare the treat for the boy, James handed the child his smartphone and explained, "I need to talk to Eleanor. Please stay here, eat your treat, play on the phone, maybe even watch some videos online. Okay?" "Of course, Uncle James's name. I can manage perfectly well on my own. Don't worry." Watching this scene, the elderly woman could barely hold back tears, and hiding her emotions, slowly started walking towards the room she old-fashionedly called the living room. James followed her, eager to find out what the elderly woman wanted to talk to him about. Eleanor settled into an armchair, and James sat on the sofa diagonally across from her, so they could talk comfortably. Eleanor watched her son-in-law attentively, but he didn't wait long and asked without preamble, "Eleanor, explain to me why Sarah reacted so inappropriately to the boy's appearance in our apartment. I admit, I'm partly to blame for not warning her. But we are adults. Instead of talking calmly, she practically just ran away to you. Is that normal?" Eleanor didn't interrupt her son-in-law's indignant speech, but she didn't rush to answer his question, instead asking one of her own, "Before we start this difficult conversation, to try and help my daughter save her family, I need to be sure that it makes sense. Just tell me honestly, is the boy your illegitimate son?" James's indignation knew no bounds. "No, of course not. I never even thought of cheating on Sarah. I love and respect her very much. My attitude towards children is starting to scare me. The boy ended up in our apartment because of a desperate situation. Sarah didn't even try to get along with him, although, as you probably noticed, he's quite well-mannered and intelligent, a very charming boy." James's answer calmed the agitated woman, and taking a deep breath, as if preparing to parachute, she decided to tell the truth. "Well, as they say, all that is hidden becomes known. As her husband, you have the right to know why my daughter avoids contact with children. I think I have the right to tell you her story, which first seemed like a happy fairy tale, and then turned into a terrible nightmare that destroyed her normal life. My daughter grew up a wonderful and intelligent girl, a true joy to me and my husband. We had no trouble getting her into one of the best educational institutions in our town. Our family's prosperity and the positions my husband and I held allowed my daughter to fit in among the so-called golden youth. However, the educational institution had a very strong teaching staff, and grades weren't for sale, as you might have thought. Children were skillfully engaged in learning, and our daughter was one of the best students in the class. They even made her a mentor for her desk mate. The boy was from a very good family, quite influential in our town. It's no joke. His father was a high-ranking official. His mother held a significant position in the same department. In short, they lived better than our family, but they didn't hinder the friendship between their son and our daughter. They sincerely welcomed her and communicated with my husband and me kindly, not dismissively. When my daughter was in 10th grade, her father passed away suddenly. A blood clot detached, as the autopsy showed. It was her friend's family who supported me and my daughter after that loss. I am still grateful to them for that, because I was in such a state that I almost followed my husband myself. So, of course, I didn't object at all when my daughter decided to marry her friend. So what if she was just over 18 at that moment? It was obvious that true feelings shouldn't be stood in the way of. Her friend's parents also didn't object, and were even happy that my daughter became a part of their family. A year after the wedding, my daughter and her friend had twins, 2 boys. Healthy, cheerful, sturdy, they grew and brought joy to all of us. My daughter couldn't get enough of her children. You know, dear, she used to tell me that when she was walking, pushing the stroller in front of her, her heart felt like it would jump out of her chest from happiness. Of course, I helped when I could. Mrs. Thompson repeatedly suggested that my daughter hire a reliable nanny, but my daughter refused every time, and mostly she managed on her own. God knows what it cost her, but she didn't drop out of university and even managed without taking an academic leave, and Mr. Thompson got her a prestigious, well-paid job in a position where the workday was strictly regulated and there was a benefits package and other perks. He certainly had such an opportunity, and it wasn't shameful to provide patronage to his daughter-in-law. My daughter was very intelligent. The boys were 6 years old when my daughter got pregnant again. Her friend greeted the news with joy. And why would he be upset? The relationships in the family were wonderful, as far as I know. There wasn't a single quarrel between them, as if 2 halves were lucky enough to unite into one whole. I know many were envious, and some women tried to start a romance with her friend, but he didn't need anyone but my daughter. Everything was so perfect that there was no thought that everything would collapse overnight due to a terrible tragedy. My daughter needed to go to the doctor, and her friend volunteered to pick up their sons from daycare himself. By a ridiculous coincidence, his car broke down that day, and he decided not to call a taxi, but to walk the children home through the green area. The weather was wonderful, and although the rides weren't working yet, there was a snack bar at the exit of the area, which the boys eagerly wanted to visit. On the way, her friend met David, and while he was talking to him, the children, getting playful, ran out to the pond. But the March ice turned out to be treacherously thin. My grandsons, as witnesses later said, didn't even have time to cry out. They went under the water instantly. Her friend and David rushed to the pond, but only the specialists who arrived at the scene of the tragedy managed to pull the boys out. Her friend later tried to justify himself, repeating like a broken record that he was only distracted for a few seconds. But what was the point? Our boys drowned. It couldn't be fixed. Her son-in-law was the first to give me this bitter news, because he was afraid for my daughter, and rightly so. I went to the private facility where I knew my daughter was at the time. My heart told me it was better if doctors were nearby when the terrible grief would overwhelm my daughter. Seeing me in the corridor, my daughter probably understood everything from my face. After hearing the news of what had happened, she had a hysterical fit. Even a large dose of medication couldn't calm her down. She didn't make it home that evening. She ended up in a medical facility with a nervous breakdown. From the stress over her deceased sons, my daughter couldn't save the baby she was carrying. The doctors didn't even consider it a child yet, and she had already lost it. At the boy's funeral, my daughter stood like a stone statue, without tears, without emotion, pale as death. The emptiness in her eyes was especially frightening. Her friend suffered no less, looking years older at 25. He tried to take my daughter's hand to support her, but she recoiled from him as if he were a leper. She never again crossed the threshold of the apartment where she had lived with her husband and sons. How many times her friend tried to talk to her, I can't count. But it never worked. My daughter simply erased her husband from her life. Her friend's mother came to us, realizing that my daughter didn't want to see or hear her husband. She knelt and begged for her son's forgiveness, saying he had become unrecognizable, sharing her sad thoughts that he was on the verge and might leave this world. But my daughter didn't react at all. She simply couldn't forgive her husband for the death of their sons. Her friend also couldn't forgive himself. He truly turned from a vibrant man into a pale shadow of his former self. My daughter predictably quit her job, ostensibly voluntarily, but in reality, everyone understood that she simply couldn't bear being under public scrutiny. Furthermore, an unusual and unexpected problem arose. My daughter would approach hysteria whenever she went outside and saw a child. She changed her route, but it's absolutely impossible to completely avoid meeting children. One day, my daughter and I were riding in the elevator, and a neighbor with a little girl got in with us. Everything seemed normal, but I became anxious. After our fellow passengers left the cabin, I looked at my daughter and saw blood running down her chin. She had bitten her lip so hard trying to suppress a hysterical fit. After this incident, my daughter stayed at home almost nonstop for nearly a month. I even called a specialist doctor, the best of the best, to the house. There were changes, but they weren't quick and not at all positive. After a period of apathy, my daughter became aggressive. She seemed to have developed an obsession, and the medication prescribed by the doctor couldn't control it for long. My daughter took pills, would fall into a state of indifference for a few hours, and then would begin to think about something tormentedly, pacing back and forth across the room. One day, I saw her searching online for dangerous substances, and I became seriously frightened. I realized my daughter had decided to take revenge on the unwitting culprit of her children's death. I tried to be constantly by her side, watching over my daughter so she wouldn't do anything irreversible. One day, my daughter managed to leave the house in the morning while I was asleep. Friends later told me she ambushed her friend outside his work and attacked him with her fists. She was shouting, "Why are you alive, and our sons aren't?" I don't know, maybe my friends exaggerated, but apparently 4 strong men could barely pull her away from her bewildered friend. He didn't even resist. When I came to pick her up, my daughter was sitting in a back room, where the smell of hated medication hung, and she was barely reacting to anything. They told me an ambulance had come and sedated my daughter. Among friends and neighbors, of course, the only talk was about the accident with my grandsons, and about my daughter going crazy with grief. One day, her friend's father called me and strongly urged me to leave the town with my daughter. You don't refuse people like him. Besides, I myself was thinking about how to hide my daughter from memories, from sympathetic and curious glances. I quit my job, sold the apartment. Again, thanks to her son-in-law's parents, I managed to do it quickly and at a quite reasonable price, given the urgency. My daughter and her friend got divorced remotely, again thanks to his relatives. My daughter didn't even have to go anywhere. As a result, we moved to this town, far away from everything that had been. Well, and then, dear, you know the rest. You met her, and my daughter started coming back to life. Don't think my daughter hates children. It's just that it still hurts her. She even refuses the possibility of becoming a mother again because of the fear of repeating the nightmare she went through. The elderly woman fell silent. Telling her daughter's terrible story had exhausted her emotionally. James noticed how pale her face had become and hurried to the kitchen to get her some water. The boy was engrossed in playing on the phone, and James, stroking his head, filled a glass and returned to the living room to the elderly woman. "I'm sorry I made you remember everything." Eleanor, carefully drinking the water, said bitterly, "Ah, dear, if only it were possible to forget it at all. Perhaps you should have known about my daughter's past sooner. I could never bring myself to tell all this out loud. My daughter, as I understand it, still can't talk about it either." James looked at Eleanor in bewilderment and admitted, "Honestly, I couldn't even imagine that such a tragedy might be hidden behind my wife's unwillingness to become a mother. I thought maybe she didn't want to ruin her figure. It's hard to even imagine the feelings she must have had when she saw the boy in our kitchen. What a surprise I managed to pull off, right on our wedding anniversary. How can I ask for my wife's forgiveness now, so she'll understand me? I truly had nowhere else to bring the boy, and for a number of reasons, the child needed to be sheltered for a week or two in a comfortable and safe place where his parents' enemies wouldn't even think to look. It all happened practically by chance. I arrived at the branch and ran into an old friend on the street, someone I hadn't seen since the service. He's more than a friend to me. It's only thanks to him that I survived. But that's a long story. And in civilian life, our paths diverged to our respective hometowns, and as happens, we lost touch. I tried to find him on social media once. Maybe I should have searched more persistently. Then I would have found him. Well, I got caught up building my career. In short, we hadn't seen each other for about 15 years, and here I meet my friend in a town that's foreign to both of us. He had changed, of course, over the years, but I recognized him immediately. He almost walked past me without noticing, but I stopped him. It turned out that my friend had come to solve problems for his sister and her husband. They had gotten involved in a lawsuit with some not-so-reasonable people who were used to handling everything in a criminal way. My friend was most worried about the boy, his nephew. He explained to his sister that just in case, as a precaution, the child needed to be hidden, because these gangsters could easily influence the outcome through him. But they couldn't think of a safe place. And then I appeared out of nowhere. My friend's idea of taking the boy out of the town seemed like the ideal option. Indeed, there were practically no leads that could point the gangsters to the child's whereabouts. It's also good that the boy has a strong character. He's growing into a real man. His parents and my friend told him he needed to stay with me for a little while, and he took the news calmly. I picked him up like in a detective story, so as not to be caught by the city's surveillance cameras. We agreed with my friend to get in touch in a week, and he himself was supposed to call me when the matter was resolved. The boy, of course, is just an ideal child. He settled into the unfamiliar place easily and even went to sleep on his own after brushing his teeth. All that's left is to wait for a call from my friend. It's very easy for me to communicate with the boy, but on Monday I have work, and I doubt I can take him with me. Now I don't know what to do at all." James fell silent, and then unexpectedly for him and the elderly woman, Sarah's voice rang out. "Nothing special. You'll go to work as usual, and I'll stay with the boy. Just leave me the car so I don't have to take the child back and forth to Mom's on public transport." It turned out that contrary to the elderly woman's calculations, her daughter had already returned from the cultural center, and it seemed, had heard some part of James's story. To her mother's anticipating question, Sarah explained, "I couldn't watch the play there." I went to wash my face and realized I couldn't go back and stare at the stage without even trying to grasp the plot. I typed a message to Martha apologizing and came here. It turned out I came back just in time. Perhaps I needed to hear this boy's story from the outside, because, dear, forgive me, I suspected you of cheating. I hardly would have believed you if you had told me all this yesterday. Today I can look at this situation more rationally. Mom, you don't mind if I visit you with the boy, do you? The elderly woman, trying not to scare away the changes in her daughter's attitude towards children, spoke very cautiously. Of course, come visit. The elderly woman wanted to add something else, but her eyes stung betrayingly, and she decided to change the subject. My daughter, dear, aren't you hungry? I could eat something right now. Let's go to the kitchen. Besides, we need to see how the boy is. if he's bored, because I completely forgot about the rules of hospitality. The boy, seeing Sarah, didn't forget to greet her, and Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she returned his greeting. James, who now understood the reason for his wife's strange behavior, was amazed by her resilience. Having gone through such a life trial, she had managed to endure and never tried to appeal to his pity or evoke sympathy by telling him what she had faced. Sarah gently but persistently declined the elderly woman's attempts to feed everyone who had gathered in her kitchen that evening. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, but we should probably go home. I'll stop by tomorrow closer to lunchtime." James, who understood he had been forgiven by his wife, was very happy and warmly said goodbye to the elderly woman, promising, "We'll all visit you together tomorrow. If you feel well and the weather is warm, we can go out into nature. How does that sound?" "Wonderful, dear. Let's not plan too far ahead." Saying goodbye to Eleanor, Sarah, James, and the boy, headed to the other end of town. James got behind the wheel and saw in the mirror how carefully his wife buckled the boy into his seatbelt. It was obvious that for Sarah, this was an absolutely natural gesture, once brought to automatism. She was clearly a tender, caring mother. She loved her children very much, and after the misfortune that befell her, she suffered in a way you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Carefully parking the car near the entrance, James carried the sleeping boy up to the apartment in his arms. Sarah straightened the tangled sheet on the sofa, carefully took off the boy's shoes, and covered the child with a blanket. Watching his wife, James felt incredible tenderness towards her. Unexpectedly, his beloved wife had revealed an unfamiliar side of her personality. He understood that he had made the absolutely right choice. Later they, having closed the kitchen door, drank tea with the leftover cake, and as if there had been no wall of misunderstanding between them yesterday, planned their weekend schedule with jokes and kisses. James finally decided to bring up the unpleasant topic and admitted, "Dear, I'm a real idiot. I almost ruined everything with my action, and I want to thank you very much for your understanding." Sarah smiled. "Well, honestly, I also overreacted. So I suggest we forget about it. Let's move on." The weekend was fun, and even better than the couple had expected. They managed to get the elderly woman out for a walk, who enjoyed the sunny day much less than her daughter's happy eyes. Sarah gladly answered the boy's questions and also constantly watched to make sure he wasn't in danger. However, neither her mother nor James dared to make remarks or reproach her for being overprotective. The boy, it seemed, didn't even pay attention to the fact that he was being surrounded with maximum care. By agreement with Sarah, he called her by name, not using the word aunt, and seemed quite happy with his unexpected trip. After taking the elderly woman home after their outing, the trio lingered, because there was no chance of leaving Eleanor's without being fed. However, no one objected. Late in the evening, when Sarah was putting the boy to bed, the child quietly asked her, "Do you think my parents are okay? Will I see them soon?" Trying to make her voice sound firm and convincing, Sarah replied, "Of course, they're fine. They'll finish all their business very soon, and you'll meet." The calmed boy fell asleep. Sarah, afraid of waking the child, beckoned James to the kitchen and began to question him about the situation the boy's parents were caught up in. "Dear, honestly, I don't even know all the details. David gave me a very brief outline, but I understood that his sister and her husband were really being targeted by some serious thugs." Sarah began to ask clarifying questions that were unexpected for James. "Are these gangsters from the town you went to, or are they outsiders? Did David mention any nicknames?" James told her everything he knew, but the information Sarah received wasn't enough, and she suddenly asked, "Can you contact David urgently? I need to get a few clarifications from him to try and help the boy's parents. Of course, he's doing well and is quite comfortable here, I hope, but it shouldn't be that a mother and son are separated for long." From Sarah's voice, it was impossible to tell how much she had taken the boy's and his parents' situation to heart. But now, knowing his wife's past, James understood how difficult it was for her. Actually, David gave me a password to a chat in case of something like this, where all messages automatically disappear. I think I can try to contact him. James opened the necessary website, entered the data he had memorized at his army friend's request, and a few minutes later exclaimed happily, "It worked! David greeted me." Sarah thoughtfully advised, "Dear, ask him a question. The answer to which will let you know for sure if it's your friend you're talking to, and if there's even the slightest doubt, close the site immediately and take the SIM card out of the phone." Alarmed by his wife's suspicions, James quickly typed a few phrases and waited impatiently for a response. Reading the received message, James exhaled with relief. "Everything's fine. It's definitely David," he answered with our code phrase. Sarah nodded and asked, "Excellent. Write to David that your wife will be messaging him now, and give me the phone. I'll find out everything I need from your friend myself. I'm not surprised by anything anymore." James handed the smartphone to Sarah. She messaged the stranger for quite a while, then grabbed a pen, quickly wrote down a number on a bread package, tore off the corner of the paper with the numbers, squeezed it in her hand, and handed James the phone. "That's it. I'm going. I need to make a call." Sarah left the kitchen and went to the room with the best soundproofing in the apartment. Taking a few deep breaths, she dialed the number of her former father-in-law, which she had memorized. The phone was unavailable. She gathered all her will and dialed her former husband's number. Soon his voice answered, "I'm listening. Don't be silent." Sarah's voice was hoarse with emotion, and she replied, "Hello, it's me. I need your help. More precisely, perhaps your father can resolve the situation, but I can't reach him. The robot says the phone is out of range." Michael's demanding tone noticeably softened. "Dear, I'm glad to hear from you, even under these circumstances. My father is abroad now, but if you tell me what the problem is, I'll certainly try to provide all possible assistance. I work in the regional department now, so all my connections are at your service." "Thank you," Sarah replied, told him everything she had learned, and dictated the number she had written down. "Okay, dear. I understand everything. It's not the simplest matter, but it's solvable. I think in the end, there's a more influential force for every thug. I'll try to help. Warn this acquaintance that I'll call him tomorrow or the day after, depending on how things turn out, from my phone, and he can safely accept the call. Thank you." Without waiting for Michael's reply, Sarah ended the conversation, which had been very difficult for her, and washed her face with ice water, hoping it would bring her at least some semblance of emotional balance. Even during the conversation with Michael, she had wanted to apologize to him, but couldn't. The bitter resentment towards his carelessness, which had caused her to lose her children, still burned in Sarah's heart. At the same time, she perfectly understood that without the intervention of her former husband, who had extensive connections in the region, the boy's family was practically doomed, and she wanted to protect the child and try to save his parents. Sarah sat in the room for some time, steadying her heartbeat with breathing exercises. Seeing that almost an hour had passed, she returned to the kitchen to James and told him what Michael had said. James wrote the information his wife had given him to David and hugged her tightly. He saw how his beloved wife had become drawn in the last hour and didn't know how to help her. He wanted to protect her from all misfortunes, but instead, as James easily guessed, she had to turn to the person who had almost completely destroyed her life. The conversation had agitated Sarah. She freed herself from James's embrace and automatically began to clear the table, not paying attention to the fact that she was throwing away food that James hadn't touched at all. Finally, James took her hand and suggested, "Drop all this fuss. It's been a difficult day, and we need to rest." Even listening to James's peaceful breathing as he slept, Sarah couldn't calm down. The images of her little ones appeared before her eyes, as if in reality. Here the children smile at her with toothless grins. Then they go to daycare for the first time, and clinging to the window, wave to her with their little hands, give her cards for a holiday. Here, clearly having conspired, instead of falling asleep, they clap loudly and together when she starts singing them a lullaby. How many pleasant moments, so carefully stored somewhere far in her memory, and how brutally everything was erased by the accident. How many times she had warned her sons not to take risks. They still didn't listen. However, what was the point of being angry now? The children were gone, and their father was now the only hope that the boy would be able to hug his mother very soon. Let Michael at least be able to help this completely unfamiliar woman. The boy stirred and began to mutter something, and Sarah, slipping out from under James's arm, hurried to the child. She carefully adjusted the blanket he had almost thrown onto the floor, felt his forehead, fearing the child had a fever, and sighed with relief, feeling that, based on her experience, everything was fine. The boy opened his eyes, and Sarah, sitting on the edge of the sofa, began to quietly sing a lullaby. The boy had long since fallen asleep, but Sarah remained sitting nearby. And she so wanted the child to return to his parents as soon as possible, and at the same time, she understood that she would desperately miss interacting with him. When the sky, visible through the gap between the curtains, lightened, Sarah quietly went to the kitchen to make herself coffee and work on documents, because there was no point in going back to sleep. In these dawn hours, perhaps somewhere far away, matters directly concerning the boy's fate were being decided. But Sarah was powerless to influence anything. She had already done everything she could, overcoming her deadly resentment, and now all that remained was to wait for the result. Carefully studying the papers, Sarah made notes in the margins, wrote down her suggestions on a separate sheet, and neatly putting everything into a zippered folder, began, trying not to make noise, to prepare breakfast. She had already decided to ask Mr. Davies for time off, so as not to tire the boy unnecessarily with moving around unfamiliar places. Waiting for a convenient time to send messages, Sarah typed to Mr. Davies that she would send the prepared documents through James, and began to think about how to please her little guest, who was, of course, worried about the forced separation from his parents, although he tried to be brave. When James, who had showered but was still yawning, looked into the kitchen, Sarah had almost everything ready. She invited James to the table and asked, "Dear, stop by Mr. Davies's on your way. Give him the folder with the documents from me. I've already warned him that I won't be able to come to work for a few days. If anything needs to be reviewed, he can send it to me by email or forward it through you. In extreme cases, of course, I'll come by, but I wouldn't want to stress the boy. I wanted to stop by Mom's with him and then go to a children's entertainment center. Why should he constantly play computer games? Let him have fun, play around, so he doesn't think about sad things, because it seems he had nightmares last night." James agreed with Sarah's plan, and quickly finishing his breakfast, thanked her and started getting ready for work. The boy woke up much later, but Sarah didn't think of waking him. She wanted the child to feel no discomfort. Sarah fed the child, and then suggested, "Let's stop by my mom's for a bit, and then go somewhere to relax." A message arrived on Sarah's phone, and she smiled, seeing the notification of money being deposited. James had taken care to ensure Sarah wouldn't have financial problems. Sarah smiled and asked the boy, "Would you like to go to an amusement park with me? It's not very far from town, and there are lots of options for fun there. A house of mirrors, rope courses, and apparently even a climbing wall. Do you like active entertainment like that? Or maybe you prefer movies? That's no problem either. I haven't seen a movie on the big screen in ages." The boy admitted shyly, "Honestly, I'd rather go to the amusement park." "Well, then that's where we'll go." The elderly woman was very happy when Sarah came to her with the boy. It meant Sarah had believed James and hadn't acted rashly, demanding that the child be sent away. From her traumatic memories, she saw that Sarah seemed to have thawed even after a brief interaction with the boy, and she could barely bring herself to make them leave as early as possible. "My daughter, I feel absolutely wonderful today. Go, have fun. If anything happens, of course, I'll call. But really, don't worry. I feel like I even have more energy today after yesterday's walk." Addressing the boy, the elderly woman asked, "Boy, I ask you, have a good rest for yourself and for me." The boy nodded completely seriously and promised, "I'll ask Aunt Sarah's name to take pictures and send them to you. You have a smartphone, right?" Sarah smiled and praised him. "Well done. That's a great idea. Exactly. It'll be like I'm having fun with you. My daughter, check if your phone is charged." Sarah reassured her mother, saying she could charge her phone in the car at any time. Soon the guests left the elderly woman, and she, left alone, began to dream that her daughter would finally decide to become a mother again. It was obvious to the elderly woman that her daughter was excellent at getting along with children, but had suffered for so many years, deliberately avoiding contact with them. "May everything turn out well for my long-suffering girl," the elderly woman prayed aloud, hoping that this request would be heard somewhere above. Sarah, driving the car especially carefully, was taking the boy to have fun and felt the weight of the responsibility she had voluntarily taken on pressing down on her more and more. The boy first asked to go on the rope course, and Sarah agreed, although at the sight of the rope stretched at a height, she wanted to grab the child in her arms and not let him go. Without looking away, Sarah watched the playing child and occasionally took photos, but didn't dare to get distracted to send particularly expressive shots to her mother. Sarah felt that if she were distracted for even a few seconds, something bad would happen to the boy. The thought came to her of the degree of despair the boy's mother must have been in to agree to give her son to a practically unknown person. Such an act could only be decided upon due to a real threat to the child's life and health. So she, Sarah, had no right to let down the woman who knew the bare minimum of information, a name, an age, and that the unfortunate woman and her husband were involved in a situation they couldn't get out of on their own. However, Sarah, no matter how you looked at it, was in an even better position. The boy's mother knew even less about the people who had sheltered her son. The day filled with entertainment flew by unnoticed. The boy, tired from the numerous active outdoor activities, fell asleep after a hearty dinner and rested completely calmly until morning, without crying out or waking up. James and Sarah talked quietly in the kitchen. Sarah enthusiastically talked about how bravely the boy conquered the rides and showed pictures. "Tomorrow, after visiting Mom, I want to take our guest around our local attractions and then go to the cinema. Or the other way around, whatever the boy wants. If you can, join us. It will be fun. He's so cool and sometimes says such profound things." Today he told me that adults deliberately try to look serious so that people are afraid of them and no one bothers them. Can you imagine? James agreed that there was something reasonable in this conclusion and suggested, "Dear, let's go to sleep too, like the boy, because tomorrow, as I understand it, will be no less busy." Neither the next day nor the day after brought news from Michael or the boy's relatives. Although the child visited various entertainment and educational establishments, his mood worsened with each passing day. He became more thoughtful and sad more often. James and Sarah understood that the boy missed his family more and more, but they couldn't influence the situation in any way. Only a few days later, when Sarah and the boy were visiting the elderly woman, the long-awaited call came. Michael informed Sarah that the main difficulties were behind them and warned, "There are still some minor issues to resolve, but that's just details. The main thing is that the boy is no longer in danger. His parents have already set off towards the town where you live now. I warned them to call you in advance when they're approaching and confirm the address. In short, I will, of course, see this matter through to the end. You don't need to worry." Sarah sincerely thanked Michael. "Thank you, and forgive me for everything." Michael's voice trembled as he replied to the woman who had caused him so much pain. "Dear, you can't imagine how happy I am to hear from you, even on such an occasion. I wish you happiness, and if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'll always be happy to help." Sarah said goodbye to Michael, and the elderly woman, who had overheard her daughter's conversation, couldn't believe her ears. It seemed her daughter had just spoken quite reasonably with the person she had once loved deeply and then hated. "Mom, we need to go. The boy's parents are on their way, and I need to bathe him." The child understood that he would soon see his mother and father, and began jumping around the room, shouting, "Hooray!" Sarah could barely calm him down. In her joy at the successful resolution of the situation, the elderly woman gave the boy a photograph of herself as a keepsake and a collection of items he had taken a liking to. "Here, boy, you can look at the album and remember me." The child promised, "Thank you, but I won't forget you, Grandma, even without the items." Taking advantage of the moment, Sarah called James to tell him the good news. But it turned out he already knew. "Dear, David already told me that everything was resolved thanks to your help. I'm coming home by taxi now to prepare to meet the guests." Sarah was a little sad to part with the boy who had awakened memories of the happiest days spent with her sons, and she invited him to visit a toy store on the way. "You know, I really want to give you something too. Choose whatever you want." The boy didn't resist, but apparently shy, he didn't spend long walking among the shelves with toys, and soon took a robot from the shelf that was far from the most expensive. On the way to the checkout, Sarah put an item in the basket that the boy had once talked about with admiration, and a few more board games. "Oh, so much stuff," the child exclaimed in surprise. "Today is a real holiday." Sarah agreed. "Yes, boy, today is a very big holiday." By the time the doorbell rang, the boy was freshly bathed, and cutlery was laid out on the table. The boy's mother, as soon as she crossed the threshold, rushed to her son, hugging and showering him with kisses. The boy's father handed Sarah flowers, and David gave James a firm, manly hug. After the boy took on the role of an adult and introduced his parents to the hosts of the apartment, everyone sat down at the table. The boy's mother volunteered to help Sarah and admitted, "If it weren't for your kindness, I don't know how we would have managed it all. I can't imagine how to express my gratitude. My husband and I have collected some money to compensate for the expenses for the child and your inconvenience." Sarah turned pale and replied, "Immediately put that envelope away. Don't insult me with this action. Your boy will be going to school soon. Spend this money on him. And if it's not too much trouble, sometimes send me and James photos of him. That will be the best gratitude." The embarrassed boy's mother burst into tears and hugged Sarah. When the boy, worried about his mother's and Sarah's long absence from the table, peeked into the kitchen, he saw that the women were crying, unable to hold back their tears, and asked like an adult, "What happened? Did you get hurt? Cut yourselves? Burn yourselves?" Sarah and the boy's mother simultaneously wiped away their tears. The mother reassured her son, "Everything is fine, darling. Everything is just wonderful." Hugging the boy, she lifted him up and twirled him around. Sarah watched the happy people and felt no envy, but wished that all this family's troubles were in the past. After the guests left, Sarah trustingly leaned against James and confessed to him, "You know, I think I'm ready for motherhood." The boy proved to me that children are the greatest happiness. James didn't try to talk his wife out of it. Soon Sarah delighted him and the elderly woman with the news of her pregnancy. Exactly on time and without any complications, Sarah gave birth to a daughter. The girl was named after James's army friend and as a symbol of victory over the terrible memories of the past.